Hello everybody and welcome once again to another edition of Quick Trivia with Mike. I'm your host, Mike Brever. My producer, Scott McFerrin, is behind the camera, so you can't see him, but he's always with me as we're doing these programs here. I hope you're enjoying this as much as we are. I know we have a lot of fun coming up with new trivia and trying to challenge you. Being locked up in our homes as much as we are now because of the coronavirus, hopefully this creates a little bit of a distraction and it gives you a little bit of an opportunity to have fun. As you know, we always come to you with 3 questions. I begin the show by giving you the answers from last week, and then I give you 3 new questions. We also begin the show, and this is a new format now, we've had it for about a month, with some classical bumper music, the theme music as we come in and as we exit the show. That serves as the tiebreaker if 2 or more people get the same number of questions correct. So pay close attention to that bumper music and include that in your answers when you get to me by Monday noon, because that bumper music could determine if you're the winner or not. But let's get right into the answers from last week. I gave you a little bit of East Castle Place history last week. And as you all know, East Castle Place was originally known as Milwaukee Protestant Home for the Aged. We talked a little bit about Nellie Hinton, who's on the back wall over here. And ironically, one of your neighbors, Teresa Sundberg, actually, got to me with a little bit more history. There was a problem or two that I gave you in the facts, and because she was gracious enough to send me this information, I'm going to share some of it with you. It turns out that Nellie Hinton and Frances Hinton were actually siblings. Nellie Hinton, who actually was named Helen Matilda. Nellie Hinton died as a young girl, and Frances was her brother. He lived until adulthood, but he passed away at a relatively young age as well. I believe it was in his 30s. We talked about the fact that if you walk over to the historic building, the one that was actually constructed and opened in 1897, there's a series of stained glass windows in the north stairwell, and it says it is the Frances Hinton Memorial. Well, what really happened here is that John and Helen Hinton were the parents of Frances and Nellie Hinton. And they were so stricken with grief when they lost their second child at such an early age that they contributed to East Castle Place, which at that time was Milwaukee Protestant Home for the Aged, and created the Hinton Extension, which is the building that we now know as the Historic Building. So that's a little bit of a history about this. And as you know, Nellie Hinton actually never lived here on Downer Avenue or Bradford Avenue, depending upon the address that you go by. But there still is a theory that the good intentions and the good spirit of John and Helen Hinton with their children has led to a benevolence, if you will, in regards to Nellie Hinton and her role here. So that's a little bit more about what people have come to know as the ghost of East Castle Place. I had initially told you that Frances Hinton was the father of Nellie, but it turns out Frances Hinton was a sibling, and it was the passing of both that led to John and Helen to open up their hearts and their pocketbook and make much of what we now know as East Castle Place a reality. So that's a little bit more about the ghost of East Castle Place, and I hope you're enjoying learning a little bit more about it. As you know, we talked about with our first question, after telling you a little bit about the history of East Castle Place, we asked you what was the original address. I think, as you know, Milwaukee Protestant Home for the Aged actually opened in a duplex on Milwaukee's east side, just off the downtown area. And it outgrew that. That was in 1884. By 1892, it had outgrown the initial duplex. And when they opened here on the campus, here on Bradford, it expanded its capacity to 50 staff and residents, much more than they ever could have done with the duplex. I asked you, what was that address of the original duplex? Several people told me that they thought the address was 2449 North Downer. If you remember, I informed you that if you could give me the street, you'd get half credit for the question. If you gave me the full address, you would get full credit for the address. Unfortunately, for the people who gave me 2449 North Downer, that's an incorrect answer. 2449 North Downer is the address of the historic building as it faces Downer Avenue. So 2505 East Bradford is the address of the building, the main entrance, as you face Bradford Avenue. Downer is the address off of the Downer Street entrance. The correct answer is that Milwaukee Protestant Home for the Aged opened on Van Buren Street. For those of you that came to our 135th anniversary last year, we were at the Westin Inn. And I think in my remarks that night, I mentioned to many people that it was like coming home, because the Westin Inn was located on Van Buren Street. Well, so was Milwaukee Protestant Home for the Aged. In fact, the very first address was 710 North Van Buren Street. So our hats off to all of you that got that answer correct. It was a little bit difficult rounding that one up, but 710 North Van Buren Street was the actual answer. I then told you a little bit of a tale about a series of books written by Tom Clancy, and the protagonist in that series of films. And I talked to you about the Hunt for Red October, and Clear and Present Danger, the Patriot Act, and Clear and Present Danger again. We talked a little bit about several of the many characters or actors that have starred in that role, Jack Ryan, and who exactly was Jack Ryan. We also told you about the fact that in addition to being a protagonist in Tom Clancy novels, Jack Ryan was a real individual. And I mentioned to you that Jack Ryan was an aerospace engineer. He had worked extensively on some rocket systems that were used by the United States military. This was post-World War II. But there was something that Jack Ryan, the aerospace engineer, had designed that I found to be relatively interesting in a whole different context. And I asked you what that was. The correct answer is that Jack Ryan was the inventor of the Barbie doll. Many of you got that one correct, and my hat's off to you, given the fact that Jack Ryan was actually an aerospace engineer who worked on missile systems for the United States military, branching off and figuring out that he was the inventor of Barbie. My hat's off to you for those of you that figured it out. I did give you a little bit of a clue. I told you that the invention was based out of Willows, Wisconsin. Well, Barbie actually has her own web page, and the web page identifies her home as Willows, Wisconsin. So that's the extent that Mattel has gone to make Barbie a real-life character for little girls even today. And frankly, to the best of my knowledge, Barbie is the most popular girls' toy in America today. So those of you that got that question correct, my hat's off to you. We then delved off a little bit into college football. We talked about the Wisconsin Badgers and how they're going to be coming back on campus within a week or two. The administration is still trying to figure out how they are going to conduct practices in a safe and efficient manner, given the coronavirus that we are all forced to deal with right now. I talked about the fact that the SEC actually is probably the best known conference today because of all the national champions that they have had during the football bowl series. Alabama, Auburn, LSU, all of those are universities that just have risen to the cream of the crop when it comes to college football programs and winning national championships. However, one of the problems that the SEC has is the fact, obviously, they're all located in the southern United States. Southern United States, starting in July, August, in preparation for football season, is hot. It's humid. The University of Florida, in particular, had a problem with the health and safety of their football players and tried to figure out a way to address the dehydration that they experienced because of practices and games. There was a football coach in 1965 at the University of Florida by the name of Ray Graves, and he approached the University of Florida College of Medicine, and he said, can you do something to help me replace body fluids for our fall athletes? This heat is affecting them physically, therefore it's affecting the performance of our football team. What can you do? And the College of Medicine for the University of Florida came up with a drink which has become world famous as a sports rehydration drink called Gatorade. Gator, obviously, because the University of Florida, the nickname for their football team is the Florida Gators. And of course, aid because it aided the Gators in trying to keep them healthy. Now, ironically, initially, Gatorade was going to be spelled G-A-D-O-R-A-I-D. But Robert Cade and Dana Shires from the College of Medicine were concerned that too many people would think that there was a proven medicinal enhancement that athletes received by drinking Gatorade, and they didn't want to create that misunderstanding. So they went with the spelling of G-A-T-O-R-A-D-E, so that no one could accuse them of making claims that weren't valid. So there you have it, our three answers for this week. 710 North Van Buren Street, the original address for Milwaukee Protestant Home for the Aged. The Barbie doll was the creation of Jack Ryan, and Gatorade was invented for the University of Florida football team. Let's take a look at this week's questions and see what we have for you, shall we? You all know that I like to delve off into a little bit of history as a source of trivia that I hope you all find entertaining. And so I have a couple of history questions for you. But first of all, I'd like to give credit to two new people to our show who've been a great asset to me. Two of my historical advisors on looking for trivia, Helen Houston and Jim Fry. You've heard me mention Jim's name many times. Some of the questions we've used on this show actually came from Jim. Helen is a new consultant for our show, and she's been hard at work helping me come up with questions as well. So thank you to both of them, and if you happen to pass them in the corridor sometime and you're enjoying this show, tell them how much Mike enjoys the fact that they are new assets to this team, and we really enjoy their contributions. Before we get into this series of questions for this week, I must also tell you, by the way, as you can see, I did in fact get a haircut. I just couldn't wait any longer. It's getting hot, it's getting humid. I convinced my wife it was time. So you folks can stop the survey to find out whether Mike should get a haircut or not. I took the matter into my own hands and I got a haircut. And that's the way it goes. All right, now that I brought you up to date on my hair situation, let me let you know who the big winner was from this past week. First of all, as you all know, there's a tiebreaker. It didn't come into play this past week. We only had one who got all three questions correct. However, for those of you that are interested in the bumper music that we used, and are playing along, Don't Cry for Me, Argentina, from the Broadway show Evita, was in fact the bumper music from last week. So those of you that got that correct, congratulations, but it didn't really play a role in who the winner was. Teresa Sundberg ended up getting all the questions correct, plus she got the bumper music correct, coincidentally. So again, congratulations to Teresa. And my hat's off to you. These were not all that easy in terms of questions. Now let's move on to this week. You know that I like to give you a couple of trivia questions that are related to history. Specifically, presidential history is something that I really enjoy. We've had 45 presidents thus far in our history. Our current president, of course, Donald Trump, is president number 45. In 200 and some plus years, to only have 45 presidents, it's a real credit to the republic that the democracy known as the United States is still alive and well and kicking and looking forward to the future. My hats are off to all 45 individuals who have served in that role. Actually, my personal favorite is John Adams, particularly because John Adams was the very first president who ceded his authority upon losing an election. As you all recall, he was the second president of the United States. George Washington gave up the presidency because he decided he did not want to run for a third term. John Adams then ran. John Adams had been the vice president for George Washington. And maybe because he had previously been vice president, he ended up winning. But he only served one term. Thomas Jefferson ended up beating him out. And on inauguration day for Thomas Jefferson, John Adams just packed up and left the White House. Ironically, he did not have to pack up the belongings of his wife Abigail. Abigail never actually moved into what at that time was known as the Executive Mansion. It was completed in terms of construction during his term as president. And as you all know, the Adams were from Massachusetts. And Abigail was very settled. She didn't know how the election was going to go in the coming future. She chose not to actually move into the Executive Mansion. So John Adams lived there alone as the chief executive of the country. And so when he left, he just packed up and he spirited away in the middle of the night, actually, on Inauguration Day. Thomas Jefferson was sworn in, and the Republic lived on. Ironically also, the president has become the most powerful man on earth. The nuclear codes are in his possession and maybe someday her possession. He controls the largest and the most powerful military. The largest economy is in many ways driven by policies created by the president, but it also in many ways is one of the most vulnerable positions in the world. 4 of the 45 presidents have in fact been assassinated. Lincoln, James Garfield, William McKinley, and JFK were all assassinated. In addition to that, 17 other presidents actually either suffered assassination attempts or were victims of assassination plots. That includes Abraham Lincoln, who had a plot which we're going to talk about in a minute. James Garfield, William McKinley, John F. Kennedy, of course, Andrew Jackson, William Howard Taft, Theodore Roosevelt, Herbert Hoover, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Harry S. Truman, John F. Kennedy, and ironically, every president since Richard Nixon. Beginning with Richard Nixon, every single president has been the subject of either an assassination attempt or assassination plot. And thank goodness the Secret Service, Department of the Treasury, United States Treasury, is on duty and was able to thwart all of them. Now you all know that, for example, Ronald Reagan was actually injured in an assassination attempt. But by and large, most of the presidents were not in fact wounded. during the assassination attempts. However, there is one who was especially lucky. One president actually suffered 2 assassination attempts in 1 month. In one 30-day period, one president actually suffered 2 assassination attempts. Who is that president? Which of the 45 presidents was the victim of 2 assassination attempts in 1 month? That's question number 1. Question number 2. We're going to stay on presidential trivia a little, but we're going to go back a bit in history. We're going to talk about the fact that Abraham Lincoln actually was the first president to be assassinated, but he also was the victim of an assassination plot. If you recall, there was a plot to assassinate him before he was ever even inducted as president, sworn in as president. Today it is known as the Baltimore Plot. On November 6, 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. He was elected the first Republican president. Republicans at that time were a brand new party. They replaced the Whigs as the primary challenger for the Democrats. So it used to be Democrats and Whigs, and then it became Democrats and Republicans. Abraham Lincoln was the very first one. On February 11th, fully 3 months after the election, Abraham Lincoln boards a plane in Illinois for a whistle-stop tour on his way to Washington, D.C. to be sworn in. The plan was to stop at 70 towns and cities along the way so that he could hold a rally and speak to the people and have them get to know their new president. As you remember, this was a time that was extremely contentious in American history. The Civil War was on the verge of bursting onto the scene. The Confederate state of South Carolina was on the verge of declaring war at Fort Sumter, actually. And that was the scene that Abraham Lincoln was embarking upon. At that time, also, surrounding Washington, on all 4 sides, was the state of Maryland and the state of Virginia. Virginia, as you know, left the United States and became part of the Confederacy. It actually, because of having Richmond within its state boundaries, served as the capital of the Confederacy as well. But what a lot of you don't know is that Maryland was a slave state as well. And Southern sympathies in Maryland were extremely high. There was a plot that was hatched in the city of Baltimore to assassinate President Lincoln as he came through Baltimore on the way to Washington for his whistle-stop tour. There was a band of 20 conspirators. They drew lots, and none of the 20 knew who was the one who drew either the short or the long straw. But one of the 20 was destined to become the actual assassin. And it was done in such a way so that no one would know who it was, and that would create the secrecy so that if any of them were caught, the plot could continue. At that time, the federal government hired a brand new entity, not even knowing about the plot, but they feared for the incoming president's life, and they hired a brand new entity to safeguard him on his way to Washington, the Pinkerton National Detective Agency. At that time, detective agencies were not all that common, and Alan Pinkerton actually created the very first detective agency in America. And as you know, it actually still exists in name today, so it was wildly successful. Alan Pinkerton himself, a Scottish immigrant, actually became very interested in the workings of police and solving crime. Back in 1850, he was working in a small town, and he actually, by sheer chance, stumbled upon a counterfeit ring. He reported it to the sheriff. The counterfeit ring was broken up, people were arrested, the plot was thwarted, and as we all know, Alan Pinkerton went off and started his own detective agency as a result of that. One of the things that Alan Pinkerton did in order to safeguard the incoming president was that he instructed his people and the president to not stop in Baltimore, to get on a different train, to zip right through Baltimore and go on to Washington so that the plot could not come to fruition. And that's exactly what happened. As a result of that, the Republic lived on. We know that the South split off from the North, but over 4 years later, at Appomattox, the South was, the Confederacy was defeated, and the country was reunited once again. So, the Republic that was born 85 years prior lived on because of the great work of Alan Pinkerton. One of the unique things about Alan Pinkerton is that he really lived and believed in marketing and how it could enhance his new business, the detective agency. "We never sleep" became his mantra. So the Pinkerton National Detective Agency had as their catchphrase, their slogan, if you will, "We never sleep." As a result of that, a catchphrase for the industry was invented that lives to this day. And the detective industry is all known by this catchphrase to this day. What is that catchphrase that was born from Pinkerton's motto, "We never sleep"? That's question number 2. So you've got a little bit about presidential history. Now we're going off a little bit into the Pinkerton Detective Agency. Our third question today is actually along a format of one of my favorites. It's a "What am I?" We've done some of these in the past, and I'm going to show it to you right now. Again, what am I? I think you all know that we've done some of these. And Scott, let me ask you, are you getting a glare on it? Should I adjust it for you? We've got a good view? Okay. We've done a couple of these in the past, so you know that this is a flag of some sort. So that's your third question. What am I? So those are your 3 questions for today. Again, the tiebreaker is going to be the bumper music that we have on today's show. So if 2 or more people have the same number of questions correct, identifying the bumper music will determine our winner. I'm going to turn this around again now, because I'm going to remind you that Quick Trivia with Mike is brought to you on ECTV channel 955. Again, our station management president, Tyler Gudex, our general manager, Laura Wengler, the producer at ECTV, and my specific producer right here on Quick Trivia with Mike, Scott McFerrin. If you like things about this show, it's Scott, and my hat's off to him. And of course, our artistic director, Cooper Ledvina. Now, if you want to participate in this show, first of all, you can get me the answers by noon on Monday, either by calling my office, 963-8425, or emailing me the answers at mbereaver@eastcastleplace.com. I gave those to you way too fast. But you can call the front desk and you can talk to Famata or you can talk to Lila. Any one of them will be glad to give you my phone number or my email address. You could also write the answers on a piece of paper and put them in my mailbox behind the concierge desk. I'm always happy to get answers that way. We had one person this past week actually slide something under my door in the office. That's an acceptable way of doing it as well. And for the winner, we will have a bottle of wine for next week, and we'll let you know who that is next week. So there you have it. That is Quick Trivia with Mike for this week. I'm your host, Mike Brever. I'll see you again next week, but until then, I ask you to stay safe. I ask you to stay smart. And I ask you to please be patient. All of us will be able to get back together again very, very soon, and we will all enjoy that wonderful East Castle Place hospitality. So long, folks.